Hello, I'm Soycat, and the concerning data on this map is incredibly obvious when you look at it, whereas looking at the map of nuclear reactors in France takes a bit longer to work out why that's such a big deal, and also there are maps like this one from Whole Foods that aren't concerning in the data they show, but are instead concerning because how does anyone think that Spain is over there, and why did they take away the Netherlands? They clearly started with a perfect map of Europe, and then they decided to move things around, question mark? I'm going to be going through and explaining some of these fun concerning maps today, because this is a concerning map, not just in its own right. I mean, obviously, there are quite a lot of countries in Europe which ban consensual sex between siblings or incest. As you can see, it's quite a big deal for lots of these, but then you can see that, interestingly, there's some countries that go different routes, such as Italy, which is legal if it does not provoke public scandal, which sounds bad on the surface, but honestly, is probably a decent way to do laws. If you have something that, two people, don't mind, and it doesn't cause any issues for the wider public, maybe that's something that's fine to make legal. Although, in reality, most laws aren't enforced if no one has an issue with. Also, in Greece, it's legal for minors only, and in Ireland, it's legal for same-sex siblings. That is either very progressive or very the opposite. I don't know how it works at that point. It's horseshoe theory all over again. But the interesting thing about this map is I found it on a Terrible Maps tweet recently, and if you look at the tweet itself, you can see 685 people have bookmarked it. What are you doing? Do you have your brother in mind and you're trying to book a trip to Europe together? What could possibly be going on there? Speaking of what could possibly be going on, this is the kind of equivalent map of, what Americans like to do as an equivalent. And so as you can see, this is legality of necrophilia, aka someone who is dead, in the United States. And it's weird that this varies so much from place to place. Like, you can kind of understand, like, well, in Europe, we have very different views on, who you can love and who you can't love. But I feel like something as broad as this should be fairly similar across somewhere that is culturally similar, like the United States. But no, it seems to be like a big red block on the west coast of no, 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 and then a big red block on the kind of, just inwards from the east coast saying no, no, no. But in between that, it seems to be like, don't do this again, Jimmy, we really don't like it, or, you know what, go ahead, as long as you're having a good time. And that's a very interesting way to see the world, because the only thing that is as bad as incest or necrophilia, clearly, is dual citizenship, which has the very much same kind of take on it. Because citizenship is something that you get from your country. It's a very nice gift that you get for being born somewhere, or having your parents be born somewhere. And so some countries say, yeah, you know what, this is a really valuable thing, and we're not going to let you have other countries' citizenship. All the countries in red say, if you get another citizenship, your one here is automatically revoked, or vice versa, which can cause all sorts of issues if you try to become two citizens if you get two citizenships that are both red at the same time. And countries that are orange will only let you be a dual citizen if it's absolutely required, and there's a lot of fun reasons why you can't get rid of a second citizenship. And so, there are a lot of German American citizens who can't really easily get rid of either. And it's a very interesting map to me, because lots of countries just say, yeah, if you're a citizen here, we don't care what else you're doing. The United States, for example, doesn't want dual citizenships, but they just don't recognize any non-American citizenship, but they don't stop you from having it, because they think, you know what, we're the only one that matters, so what's the deal with that? Which is incredibly interesting, right? Speaking of incredibly interesting, here's a map of the only thing which is worse than dual citizenships and necrophilia: drink driving. This is one of those things, I think it's a particularly American thing to be on a very big crusade against it, whereas it seems like most rural people in the UK are like, yeah, there's a pub there will be pubs that you can only drive to, and there'll be people driving there by themselves, and it's like, is this just like socially accepted by proxy or something? But the interesting thing about this map to me is not just that there are countries where the blood alcohol limit is quite high compared to others. In Scotland or in Sweden or Ireland or Canada, it's a fairly low limit by comparison to Russia or the United States or France or the UK. It means instead of having a couple of drinks and then driving rather than getting destroyed, you just really shouldn't be drinking anything and driving, which is how you would assume drink driving laws should work, right? But even more interesting is when you look at red countries. A lot of these countries have no drink driving laws, and the reason for some of that is because alcohol consumption is legally prohibited. In Saudi Arabia, there is no law against drunk driving because you cannot be drunk in the country, which is why there's an interesting thing to think about here, right? Like drinking and driving is a really bad thing, especially with an open container in some countries. But if you're in, say, Saudi Arabia or Iran, if you have alcohol, the safest place to drink it is in a car, right? Because if you're inside the car, you're less likely to be stopped. And so just remember, if you're gonna sneak alcohol into one of these states where they can literally behead you, just make sure you drink it while inside of a motor vehicle. That's the only way that you can, interpret this map, right? Speaking of interpreting this map, it has to be mentioned that interestingly enough, this one is very much the opposite in terms of there's no concerning data here. It's Whole Foods trying to do their thing and saying, look, we're a global market. We get things from Turkey and Tunisia. We get these from exotic places, but I really want to know the the graphics designer's thoughts. What was he doing here? Because like he was trying to highlight Turkey. He took a world map, clearly some generic world map they have. He highlighted Turkey and Israel and put these lines on there. And at some point while putting the line on, he moved the whole Iberian Peninsula, including some part of France, maybe over here. He moved the whole Iberian Peninsula right into the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, creating a land border between Europe and Africa. Is that just what being, you know, Whole Foods' value is? Like, we want to connect Europe and Africa. But then also he was like, you know what? I hate those Luxembourgers, those Belgish people, and those darn Netherlandish people. Let's get rid of all of them. And so I guess that's just what they did there. Also, is there a bridge over there between Russia and Russia with a big gulf? I feel like there's not, but I don't even understand. Oh, there actually is, funnily enough. You know, it doesn't look like that, right? Am I crazy? Does that look the same as that? Am I wild? Anyway, so with that said, this is a very weird map in terms of just everything about it. How does it happen? I want to know. Just like this one, by the way. How does this happen is an interesting question that comes down to France massively upping their nuclear energy to get away from fossil fuels, or realistically it looks like just to increase the amount of electricity available without having to burn more fossil fuels. France is one of the few countries in Europe that went really big on nuclear power. It's almost like a nationalistic thing for them, like we produce our own power here in France, and that is actually fair, you know, like as far as like in the 80s that was controversial, in the 90s and 2000s that's controversial. Everyone looks at it now and goes, wow, France was ahead of the curve on that. However, an interesting thing is where they built these reactors. A lot of people don't want nuclear reactors near them. It's a real like externality. What if it explodes and causes issues? So most of these nuclear reactors are quite close to the coastline, which is interesting. But then there's this one in Chouz, and you might think, wait, is Chouz in France? This map seems to imply that it's not. It's a big reactor, 1450 megawatts by the way, but it's in Chouz, which looks to not be in France. But if you look at the map of France, you might not know this, but France has a lot of very weird borders. You know, I love looking at borders on this channel, but Chouz is a French town which is right over here, and I think this is absolutely a hilarious place to put a nuclear power plant. It is surrounded by Belgium on all sides. There is, absolutely no way that the local residents of France will be most of the ones complaining, because most of the people who will complain about a nuclear reactor being near them do not vote in your country, and so can't cause an issue, which I absolutely love that. How can you not love that? Speaking of things that you can't love, let's move, actually, I guess we're already talking about France, so we don't need to move on that much. But speaking of things you can't love, a lot of people feel that way about Canada, and this map is a really interesting one because it shows that 50% of Canadians live north of this line and 50% live south of the line. And I know a lot of people know that Canada is very bottom-heavy in population, but this just blows my mind. Like, I've shown this to 3 separate people in real life. You look at Canada on a map, and you'd figure the midway point would probably be like here, maybe, like, yeah, or maybe like way lower to the border. But instead, it's like, yeah, the entire west of the country, the entire east of the country, besides what, just Nova Scotia there, just it doesn't mean anything. Ontario, the south of Ontario, the south of Quebec with Montreal, and indeed a little bit of Nova Scotia is all you need to get half of the Canadian population. And so the kind of interesting result of this is this map right here. And to look at this map real quick, it has, it's quite offensive, I would say. It's a concerning map because basically France, basically America, and basically China is a little bit controversial. It's basically China because it's very Asian immigrant heavy, not necessarily all Chinese, but there is a substantial Taiwanese and Chinese presence in China. And that statement is not untrue, so I'm sticking by it. There is a substantial Chinese presence in China. Tell me I'm wrong, internet. Try and leave me a comment and tell me why you disagree with that. But yeah, basically, if you look at this map, you can see that, yeah, that's the way you would simplify down to Vancouver. And if you don't know British Columbia outside of it, then it's true. Outside of Vancouver, you get a lot of Australians in the ski towns. So, basically China and Australia. Although Australia has a lot of Chinese people too, so maybe we're already covering our bases there. And then we got basically France. It's not even basically France. It's basically wants to be France. And then basically America is interesting because very few people can make this comment. It's one of those really, again, it's quite a controversial thing. But Ontario, I've been to a fair few parts of Canada now. Ontario is the most American part of Canada, and that's interesting. People who live in Toronto basically live in a big American city that is just outside its borders. It's a very weird thing. They're very, people who live in Southern Ontario are very familiar with American culture. Probably go through America to go somewhere because what are you going to do? You're going to drive to Quebec Quebec, oh, are you gonna drive to Western Canada? Yeah, good luck on that 20-hour drive. If you want to go somewhere that isn't Toronto and is a big city, you have to drive into America to go to their cities, which is intriguing to me on so many levels. But what this means is, yeah, the most American part of Canada is Ontario, right? That is why this is basically America. But also, the most famous part of Canada, the thing that people associate most Canadian things with, are from this Ontario province, which means that Canada, the most Canadian part of Canada is also the most American part of Canada, and I can't wrap my head around that properly. But yeah, I would say if you want to get the real Canadian and weird isolated experience, definitely go to one of the Maritimes or go to, like, I don't know, Alberta feels a little bit Texan, honestly, but it's got, like, go somewhere in the middle of nowhere and you'll really understand a country on a much stranger level. Speaking of understanding places on a strange level, let's move from this map, which I have to show people in real life all the time, and then they go, cool bro, I don't really care about maps, to show you this map, which is the levels of government restriction on religion. Isn't this cool? There's no concern here whatsoever. I don't think there should be separation between church and state, which is why I'm glad I live in Morocco or Turkey or Kazakhstan, but I'm sad I couldn't really quite live in Mongolia, and I'd be really disappointed to live in... I'm surprised how few countries are on the low level of this list, because separation of religion, which is the way you feel about, you know, like the man in the sky and how you live your life, should be very different to the way you feel about the man in the sky who does control your life with laws. Although I've made the point before on this channel that religion is basically... Government is basically a religion that we just all believe in. The government has no power if you don't believe it has power. In the same way, you won't go to hell if you don't believe you're going to hell, unless you believe that I'm going to hell. And you know, like if we all stop believing in hell, would hell still exist? Is a interesting question that I don't think religious people would enjoy. But the more interesting question is, if we stop believing in the government, does the government exist? Not unless they have enough guns to kill us all. But speaking of things that don't exist, this is the travel time to healthcare around the world. It's a really weirdly colored map, so it's concerning on that level, but it's also concerning to me because I remember learning about in school, like, oh, the ambulance service has a 2-hour response time for any emergency or something like that, because the first 1 hour is the most critical. There's some fun fact like that, and thinking like, wait, so if I get like stabbed somewhere and I'm bleeding out, I have to wait up to an hour? And thinking, wow, that's insane. But what's even more insane is when you look at this map and see how much of the world is not just kind of purple, but deep purple. If you're in Greenland and you need emergency healthcare, no. If you're in most of Australia and need emergency healthcare, sorry, bud. And it's interesting how much of the world, even quite populated areas, will have a fair travel time to get to healthcare if you're injured. Like, even part of Scotland right there. Do you see that? I'm going to zoom in real far. Do you see this part of Scotland? What's the deal with that? Most of Iceland? Iceland's a rich country. It's a very interesting map, in my opinion. Just like this one, by the way, is an interesting map. A little bit concerning that so many countries are on a high drought risk. Whatever the reason, countries are going through more extreme weather events. And I was watching a video about who would win from climate change recently. It's one that I still think is a good idea. It's just a lot of the countries that will gain from climate change, the positivity effects of it, are still going to go through worse droughts. And I can't find any like neutral articles that are saying, well, the benefit of this is worse than the droughts, rather than being like, oh yeah, they get some small benefit, but trust us, it's way worse. No country should think global warming is good. And I understand why we will have to lobby and say, yeah, it's never good. But there are some countries who objectively win from it. But all the countries that do have a lot of downsides that are way more reported than the upsides, for very understandable reasons if you're in a Western press position. But yeah, it looks like China is at high risk of drought. Who knows what happens if that happens there, as well as Ukraine, although I think that's not the big issue they've had since 2019. Speaking of big issues since 2019, I just want to bring this up because while looking for healthcare maps and finding this one, I found this map of healthcare around the world. It is the universal healthcare map of the world. Single payer is when the like what people say universal healthcare, they usually mean single payer, like which is free at the point of use, paid for by everyone. That is single payer healthcare, and honestly, loads of people like to say it's really common around the world, but it's actually not. There's Australia and New Zealand, although Australia has a lot of health insurance. Japan has a mandatory fee each time you visit the doctor. Sweden and Finland and Norway technically all have it. Then there's Spain and Portugal and Canada. There's some weird provincial rules in there, and there's some extra layers of health insurance. Basically, every country that has single payer doesn't go full single payer, and then all of the countries that you might say, like, oh, like, this is the annoying thing, like, this is an example of a map that is so America heavy while trying to talk down about America that it stops working as a map, because universal healthcare through other means is very confusing. So no universal health, I had to Google universal healthcare, it's available for everyone all the time, and so I had to Google then, like, okay, so does America have a universal healthcare? It does not. By the way, why is it not on either of these categories? Surely it should be Why doesn't it have a lovely little, like, explaining what it is down here in the bottom left? But, so, they give America a color they don't explain, and then I do believe also, in the United States, they say the reason it's not is because anytime you get medical care, someone has to pay for it. It is the reality that since the 90s, a hospital has to take you, even if you can't pay, stabilize you, and even if they think there's no chance you'll pay, they can't let you die for the sake of that, right? So you do get the healthcare you need, maybe not, I guess, emergency healthcare you need. Maybe not, you wouldn't get pills just if you didn't look like you were going to pay or something like that. But then if you look at, say, the thing they argue here is that, well, anytime you get medical care, someone has to pay. Oh, America's so bad. But look up, like, a country that is famously quite left-wing in its policies, has high taxes, etc. You look at Belgium, and it's like, well, yeah, Belgium has universal healthcare because there's a health insurance system, which is provided for every Belgian citizen. Every Belgian system has access to the social security system, but there are gaps in the system where people can drop out. Wait, so not everyone in Belgium gets healthcare, and also it's just done on an insurance basis. It's just the insurance is kind of done for by the government. It's a, it's a mandatory insurance system, but isn't that the system that exists in America? If you don't get health insurance in America, you pay some extreme, it's actually not that extreme, it's like 1% of your income, but you pay a fine if you don't have insurance, which is the same as saying it is mandatory, right? To say, here is the penalty for not doing something, makes it mandatory. If, technically speaking, you can drunk drive anywhere in the world if you really want to. It's just there's a penalty for not doing so. They don't kill you for it, sure, but they'll give you a fine, send you to prison, take away your license. One of those three things, depending on where in the world you are. Assuming it's not Saudi Arabia, of course, where it's A-okay, as I mentioned. If you're gonna drink alcohol there, do it in cars. But yeah, you can see, interestingly enough, like, yeah, actually, looking at this all, it does seem as though, like, what is the actual difference there? I don't understand it. If anyone does, could you let me know? Why does America have to talk about healthcare in a way that's confusing to everyone else? Because even working out that, for example, you can get stabilized or that there is a health insurance system is something Americans don't talk about because they'd rather debate nonstop about who has to pay for the healthcare. And the answer is everyone's paying for the healthcare in every country. Just work out the most efficient way to do it and stop trying to make it's one of those annoying things because finding data on healthcare is so hard because it always relates to America, and it's like, this isn't about you, I just want to learn about systems around the world. Speaking of learning about systems around the world, here's a cool map to finish out this video: international tourist arrivals by region. This is percent change since 2019, which is the last normal year of data, and if you're watching this in the future, I hope that you don't know why 2019 is the last normal year. That would be a good outcome. But if you look at this, you can see that even in 2022, so 2021, obviously tourist numbers drop, but even in 2022, tourist numbers are still down across the board. In the Americas, 35%, in Europe, 21%, in Asia Pacific, 77%. Tourist, now there is there is very few restrictions on travel. Tourist numbers have still not gone back to normal in two reasons. One is that it's very expensive and people have a lot less money. We're going through a global kind of, an economic crisis because we had a lot of money we were deliberately told not to spend for various pandemic reasons. But the second reason is that during the pandemic, a lot of people got into comfortable travel habits or maybe got out of travel altogether and were like, yeah, you've got to go on domestic holidays. For some reason, I still to this day, I don't know any compelling reason why this is true. Someone would be, like a domestic, like holiday, going on vacation is entirely okay. It was like, yeah, I'm going to get on a 6-hour crowded bus to go to Nuki, and that's fine because Nuki's in my country, but I would be a sinner. I would be spreading a global disease if I went from London to, what's a 6-hour gap? Like maybe like if I went to New Delhi, that would be monstrous because India COVID is so different to British COVID. Like, I feel like it happened to a lot of people, but especially on the left, people who are like usually very open borders are like, close those borders. British COVID so much better than other COVID. Close those borders. French COVID is so much worse than ours. And it's like, once it's spread, once it's in the population and growing, it doesn't matter as long as there's not drastic waves in a country. And it just seemed really ridiculous to me. But because of that idea that like, yeah, you don't know when traveling internationally if the country will just decide to close the borders or arbitrarily demand a huge amount of money, like people are still spooked about it, and so tourism is down, which I know a lot of places have an over-tourism problem. That is a problem, but the majority of the world, tourism is a good thing. If someone from Sweden goes to Brazil, that is good for both countries. Brazil gets some money, it's like an export, and then someone from Sweden learns about Brazil and maybe brings some of those ideas back big with them. The world gets better when people see things that are outside their comfort zone, and the world gets better when people see new places, and for some reason we've been, like, some people look at this map and go, good, yeah, no one should be going anywhere ever again. Let's just all stay exactly where we live forever. But the point point of the world is there are so many places in it, and one of those places might be better for you and I. It's just, this is concerning. This is one of those maps that caused me actual heartbreak at the world still not recovering, and in 2023 so far, it's still not looking that great. But yeah, let me know if you have a positive spin on this, and also let me know if you enjoyed this particular map video. I want to go through some, like, there's a lot of, like, weird categories of maps I've had to save forever, so I want to go through, like, fictional maps at some point. Let me know if you're enjoying this, and also, the videos on the channel are slightly more regular now, so if you're enjoying that, you go to patreon.com/toycat, show your support by buying me a kebab, or you can not, because, as always, second channel, don't care. Goodbye.